and have us get impeached.
Back with Captain Blackburn. He's back. We're back. And
Da-da-da,
we're gonna give it our
da-da-da.
best.
This is not a show and might not even be a connection. Here's Judah and Guest.
It's Judah and Guest, and I'm back with Captain Blackburn.
Arr.
Back on the horn with Captain Blackburn. Good to have you back, man. It's been a busy, you're in a busy season, aren't
I
you?
am in a busy season. And then I remind
Of
myself
your
it is
life,
only a season.
right? Right. Amen. I think that's a good thing to start with for all of us. Someone had a good, just a new friend say recently, saying there is a time to really be in the weeds, be in the jungle of our relationship with God,
Hmm.
and he said, but he called me back, and I thought it was good. He said, I forgot to tell you, it's only for a season, and I thought that was good, because I was feeling a little bit like,
The
when,
problem with seasons is sometimes they're not on the calendar year, um,
hmm,
and sometimes they are. Um, so yeah, wrestling with God sometimes that can last for a while.
yeah. Well, today I wanted to talk about politics, but not necessarily talk politics as far as punditry of current events, though probably will come up a bit here and there. But politics in the more general term, how does a man like you or I, a Christian man, a man who loves God and is called according to his purposes, how do we partake in the polis, in our civic? Do we have a civic responsibility? Should we participate at all? Some would say no. America has a vast history of those who would say no, we don't participate at all. I don't know if I agree with that. Well, of course, I guess, of course, but
Up until today, you've not agreed with that.
that's right. Till today. Now, tomorrow, well, the next minute is it could bring information that I would gladly change my mind.
You could change your mind.
Yeah. So let's talk about it. What do you think, Josh? First of all, are we called to lead our families into engaging with the polis, engaging with the civic organization
Hmm.
of our country, of our state, of our community?
Well, I think the difficult part is I'm not, if one looks at it, I suppose, from a rather sola scriptura view of scripture. I'm not sure if there's a, I don't recall there being a definite um, imperative to be an active participant in the political life of um, the world around us. However, I don't take that view. So that being said, I, I, my knee jerk is that it's inevitable.
Hmm.
Because even taken to extremes, even the recluse um, is making is even by removing themselves from the polis, from the civic life, the communal life, making a statement about something in an attempt that ultimately influences that. So it, I don't know. To me, the imperative that we have is to love our neighbors,
Yes.
um, and I think that becomes, in my mind, a guiding imperative about how we live in the polis. And so I think and I think that term polis is actually really important because, you know, some people live out in the country, um, and the communal life in the country is different than the communal life, say, in the city. Just is.
Yeah.
There, and yeah, I can't help but think that to a large degree, it's somehow inevitable. Depending, we're going to be involved in the life of the world around us, and it's really just a question of how, and then a question of calling and specific giftings and opportunity. Um, some people run for higher office, some people run for lower office, some people, are very diligent about writing their representatives letters or calling them on the telephone and making their opinions known,
Yeah.
or even working outside of the power structures. Um,
Hmm.
I think and that's why I like when you brought up the word polis. I mean, that's a much, you were talking about the city and the life of the city, right? And
Yeah.
that encompasses so much more than I think what people typically narrow down to politics. Like, I'm going to run for office,
Right.
or we're going to focus on policy, or things that really center around power, as opposed to, well, I see a need, and I don't have to involve the government to meet that need. And if I want to, I can collaborate with my neighbors to help meet that need. And I think that's still squarely within the life of the city. It's inside of the polis. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's still squarely within the organization of our civic interactions, right? We're interrelationally connected, and whether it's kind of like when people say, well, whether you believe in God or not, he exists. Well, whether you believe in politics or not, you are in it.
your neighbor exists, and
Your
yeah,
neighbor exists.
and
Yeah.
it just really is a question of, how do we love our neighbor, and are we turning a blind eye to our neighbor? Are we enabling our neighbor? Um, is there sometimes a place for protest, right? When our
Yeah.
neighbor is doing something that's harmful, but maybe it's not in a way that we can immediately bring something to a stop. There's certainly room for protest.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. Yeah, there's this aspect of it to me I think is just inevitable. Um,
Now, the difference I would say is what is not inevitable. Sorry, creaking and squeaking here. Is the division of the camps,
sure.
Republican, Democratic, what have you. That's not inevitable, right? Now,
Well,
but I was talking with a friend
maybe,
and we were talking. What's that?
maybe.
Okay, you're right. You're right. I shouldn't say it's not inevitable. What I should say is, it seems to me that is something that is less indelible than that of civic involvement.
Sure.
And it brings to mind, I've had a couple conversations lately about diversity, and my brother talks about the diversity. I think you have talked about the diversity of ideas, not of, it's not important to be a mixing pot of cultures, but it is important to incorporate a diversity of ideas so that we're not one thing.
Well, thankfully here in the United States, that will probably never. There is I mean, that's the hard thing. Like, I think when we talk about culture and ways of life, modes of being, there are some overarching commonalities amongst Americans. Um, and part of that is obviously going to be ideological and belief driven. Um, we're not a communitarian society, so we're actually a rather individualistic society. That cuts across all. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can go down the list. But I think in this day and age, it's diversity is implicit. Um, the only question becomes how much respect and for the dignity of others are we going to apply in allowing for maximum diversity? In other words, I think there is there is a form of multiculturalism that's a blender that just wants to homogenize shifting balances of power and homogenizing cultures in a way that sands off the rough edges, and really isn't very diverse at all. Versus, let's keep all our hard edges, let's keep significant differences, and then up the level of civility, up the level of human dignity that we give to someone else. Like, you can, that's why Appalachia is kind of a funny place. There is a lot of like, you do you, I do me, and as long as you don't,
never the twain shall meet.
it's all good, to a degree. I mean, it's still kind of a clan system, so things happen inside the family, it goes haywire.
Well, I think that's an interesting point, is that there has been such an emphasis on mixing the diverse ingredients that it's been less of an emphasis on diversity and more an emphasis on homogenization. And I think what you and I are talking about is that each of us is more than one thing. We are not unilateral in who we are as people. We're very complex as people, and I think it's important to remind ourselves of that, for one thing.
Yeah.
But I think I was talking to a friend about how important it also is to have delineation. I am not you because of things that are different, right? Like, the way that we differentiate ourselves is by being, we differentiate ourselves through values as well as other things. But as humans, being intellectual and, having sort of, I mean, animals differentiate themselves based fully on physical aspects. But as we are more language-based and intellectually based beings, we differentiate ourselves based on values.
We do, and I'm just going to throw this in there because I think we can get lost in a rather westernized view of anthropology. And I agree with you to a limit as far as that we are differentiated much more, like by magnitudes more than any other creature on the planet, by the effects that our beliefs and our thoughts create, right? And that there is an aspect of our bodies, right? Like, and that shows up in our skin color, in our haircuts, in our facial hair, in our clothes, how we walk. And in our sexual appendages, right? Those are all things that differentiate us, and they are a bedrock of diversity. And if we're honest, those have also been huge stumbling blocks in the past. I mean, that's, in my opinion, that's a huge aspect of racism. Apart from ideology, it's we implicitly as human beings, and I think we just need to own this, have a fear of the different.
Of other.
It's of the other, right? It's the source of every conflict, whether in a marriage, between parents and children, between friends, between employers and employees. I mean, just differences at their face, whether or not they're true or not, or the perceived differences,
right,
becomes an object oftentimes of fear. And so, I mean, when we're talking about the life of the city, the polis, and these differences, there's a part of me that wants to say, like, even for us to love our neighbor, we have to start by owning and accepting acknowledging differences.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, we could be wrapping this conversation about culture wars. Like, I'm a big believer that, this whole conversation about culture wars is like beating a dead horse. In my opinion, like if there was a culture war, we lost it, and we lost it a long time ago. And what we're really seeing is just the aftermath of that loss. And to me, I think the reason why I embrace that notion is just the mentality. Not so much that I think that we're under attack, per se, but rather moving towards, especially models from the past, where there's triumph in things that are small, and there's triumph in things that appear powerless. So, I mean, the catacomb church, even this concept, the model of a catacomb church, plays itself out in various places and times in history.
Yeah.
However, the reality is we're not in the catacomb, and so I mean, I throw that out there in the sense that I don't know. I view it my own self, and it's like, if I have any place in civic life, it's simply just to love my neighbor.
Well, but that needs unpacking.
It
Jay
does.
says,
hierarchy.
animals also differentiate on hierarchies, not just physical. And I think
but hierarchies
that's
are
important.
physical, and they are somatic.
Say more.
So, and I think this is even more abundantly clear in primate, other mammals, and in particular primates. I mean, there are social factors, and there are truly political factors. The ability to collaborate with others, to ensure safety and to exert power. And though amongst humans, though, I mean, let's be honest, like, yes, there are hierarchies.
Oh yeah.
And, I mean, there really are. And it's another thing.
When I go get a surgeon to operate on if I were to get a surgeon to operate on my mother, I would not just randomly choose a surgeon, right? I would want the best surgeon.
The best, yeah. And that comes back to one of my favorite terms, which is an aristocracy. But true aristocracy, is ruled by the best. Though those types of aristocracies are rather rare, sort of.
But that's pretty physical, right?
It is. Well, I mean,
in behavior wise, right?
It is
measured through behavior.
It is measured through behavior, and it is intellectual. I mean, like, I'm reading through Turgenev's Father and Sons, and it's a reminder to me about aristocratic culture. That's something that's rarely seen in America outside of a few families. So we're talking about, it's like the 1860s, I think, is about the time that novel is focusing on. And there's a transition in Russia between the serfs are getting emancipated, and but aristocratic families, there's still a love for the arts, for music. Most of the landed gentry speak 3, sometimes 4 languages, and Russian, French, German, and sometimes English. But it's a culture, right? Because I think about my own American education, and even in my own family culture. Like, I don't come from a high family culture. We're middle class, blue collar folk, but not a place that, not an intellectual life that where we might converse in a different language. That's just not something that happened in my house. Now, that happens in some American homes, but let's be honest, it's rare. To have that kind of intellectual culture within a family, or even an extended family, or within your social circle. So throwing out there about culture. Sorry, tangent. hierarchy,
No, but it's interesting.
aristocracy, and that perpetuates itself, though.
But there is something in there about hierarchy, in that we can have all the different values that we want, but we still get organized based on the observable behavior, right? Like you can have values, but if they do not produce efficacy or efficient production, right, of some sort, then they do not get put high up on the hierarchy.
Well, that's priority of values. But no, I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. As far as like we fall in line, right? And I think some aspects of the way we function as humans is very symbolic. Ideally, when you follow a leader, but oftentimes there are some symbols that come along with that leader. If you're in the military, there's rank. Even in the civilian world, as a power hierarchy, there's the police.
Yeah.
And there are other hierarchies as far as the way things are structured.
Well, but so Jay says hierarchies must have competence. My pushback, I think they should.
I wish that was true.
I wish that was true, but when you guess who has a hierarchical power over me? The lady at Walmart. I don't know how efficient she is, but she tells me to wear a mask, and I wear a mask. She, so she wields power over us, and it puts her at a hierarchical at some level.
I mean,
higher.
She's not over you. However, she can deny you entry to the Walmart.
So yeah.
I would say effective.
That's the thing about. But see, that's the thing about hierarchies. Hierarchical structures is that it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't necessarily it's not equivalent to value as much as it is to access.
Well, hierarchy is really layered. I mean, I guess, and this is the thing, like when we talk about the word hierarchy, we're really talking about ruled by priests, which doesn't happen in America. But
interesting.
But when we
let's come back to that. Put a pin in that.
Hierarchy pin. We do have stratified layers of power and authority.
Yeah.
Because like when we're talking about the local government, this is true in any organization, whether it's a hospital, whether it's a company. You've got people out on the front line, you got middle managers, you got VPs, you got CEOs, and you got a board. So boom, 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 boom on your way up. You've got your city council, and then, even within like state governments, federal, national governments, there are layers of power. There are power structures.
Yeah.
And yes, I would agree with Jay that a good hierarchy, an effective hierarchy, does require competence. And I will say this, because I think just working around some organizations of different kinds, whether it be churches, non-for-profit groups, companies, one thing that Jay's comment really strikes me is that what's fascinating about hierarchy is that it actually can sometimes soften the impact of incompetence, because despite the fact that somebody might have the authority and the power on a practical level, oftentimes other parts of the organization, other parts of the body, the corporate body, take up the slack.
Interesting. The delegation aspect
or even not
Polis.
delegating it, right? Like I've seen this in organizations that have very weak leadership. Somebody, either one or two things are going to happen. Either it implodes, or somebody outside the power structure or without authority takes up the slack. Or sometimes somebody overexerts their authority. So that, there's a little give and take there. Can't be based on power.
Jay says it can't be based on power, or it doesn't last. It must have competence. Now, but see, the pushback I would put on
level of competence.
The pushback, and this is what I want to bring. I agree in essence. I agree in the core of ultimately, yes, I agree. However, we live in, I hate to say it, but in a privileged society where the impact of somebody's actions is not a felt impact, or let's say that the impact of a leader's or a somebody at the top of the hierarchy, if their impact does not it isn't felt on a survival level, so it doesn't inhibit me from living, or it barely touches my level of comfort, then it gets a little weird when we measure the competence. What do you think?
Well, and that's I almost want to get Socratic and say, let's define competence. And I think
Yeah.
to Jay's point, and I'm just trying to think through how this really works practically. I mean, when there's gross incompetence, there's a disruption.
Yes.
So it may be just useful to say that, when we talk, there's a part of me when I think about competence, I think of competence as a more, not, I shouldn't say necessarily on a spectrum. That might be a good way to look at it. I don't know, more as a process.
Well, it's multi-layered.
It is, but
It's complex.
It can be. But I think for the discussion here, though, there is some base level of competence. Like, it works, right? Like, the organization, the structure does what it's supposed to do.
It produces the right outcome.
And when it doesn't, it does break down and it creates disruption. And generally, disruption results in the overthrow of the hierarchy.
What if disruption is the outcome, the desired outcome? Because it's funny that you say disruption, because that's the new buzzword in all the in the financial lingo. They talk about these disruptive companies that come in and change things. And it is part of the new norm, as far as when you look at virtue nowadays. Disrupting is deemed as good. We're disrupting the norm, shaking the boat. The status quo is wrong,
Maybe in the marketplace. Is that term
in
being
churches?
Used in oh, okay. Sorry.
In churches, in the marketplace.
I live under a rock, so.
Well, haven't you seen that where folks are like, we cannot abide the status quo? Like, take for example the patriarchy is the status quo. We want to disrupt that.
Yeah, well, they want to generally smash the patriarchy. That's the term I've heard used a lot.
So do you see what I'm talking about as far as disrupting what has been around for centuries, right?
Well,
is a good thing.
Very few things have been around for centuries. I think we have experienced some disruption in some structures, like the family, that has been around for centuries. Though even how families are ordered, in even like the Western world, that's been that's changed over time. I think, and this is always kind of fun. I tend to think of myself as a traditionalist, which I make distinct from being a conservative, because conservative I equate to the status quo. I mean, that's the nature of conservation generally, is to preserve what is. And as a traditionalist, I take, I'm not a progressive. And so to me, being a traditionalist is a little bit more of the best of both worlds. The dead get their vote, to use, a Chestertonian kind of phrase. The tradition is the democracy of the dead. And at the same time, being free enough to see, things as they are and what opportunities lay ahead, and be able to merge those things together going forward. Um, it's not static. Um, Now that being said, I think for me, there are some things that are static. However, how they play out, like how they're applied, and how they, those principles or even things from the past work out tomorrow might be a little bit different than yesterday.
Hmm.
But yesterday always has a vote, right? I mean, like,
Well, and
we're never
yesterday
divorced from
also
the
has a
past.
yesterday.
It has many yesterdays, yes.
Yeah, but I mean that is to say, I like that approach to traditionalism because traditions are transcendent. They don't necessarily have to do with yesterday. They have to do with a transcendent ideal.
Well, that's very Platonic of you to say that. Yeah, I would tend to say that traditions are embodied, well, which means they're historical. Um, and
Yeah.
yes, one can extrapolate ideas from those things. Um, but that I think for me is like that. Yes, there are principles. Yes, there is wisdom inherent in tradition, but how it's going to be embodied right now is going to look a little bit different. Um,
I appreciate that.
it like, and I one of the things that I struggle with, is even like my own interaction with using technology,
Hmm.
because there really isn't an embodied example from the past that is easy to compare and contrast with where
Yeah.
we're at right now. um,
Yeah.
like just the sheer speed alone of how information travels now.
Yeah.
Information traveled quickly at various times and places, but not at the speed at which it travels now.
Not
um,
even close.
Not even
Yeah.
close. And it provides a lot of opportunities, and it provides a lot of potential dangers. And
Yeah.
um, just uh, yeah, never before have we seen anything quite like this. But and that's the thing, the more I sit down and think about it, then it you know it, in my mind, that's where tradition comes in handy, of seeing other lives embodied, principles and wisdom lived out, and trying to see, is there something in the past that we can use to make sense out of what we've created now, and what's the best way to go forward.
Hmm.
But life and I'm rolling it back to life in the polis. The life in the city is the same way. Like, we've got, you'll have new challenges and new opportunities, and um, hopefully Christians are bringing to the table a rich past, a rich understanding and wisdom of what's gone on before, because that becomes a storehouse of examples. Um,
Yeah. I'm
as a,
not.
Jay,
I'm not.
I am probably social
I'm
liberal.
not optimistic about that. But Jay says, I'm. Oh, wait. I was going to click on this first one. Well, I was comparing competence to power. Power alone cannot rule hierarchy for long. There must be some level of competence to maintain it, or it will disintegrate.
It depends.
Although the Ming Dynasty,
Soviet Russia was a really fascinating experiment in how power alone can keep things going. Um,
yeah, I guess it depends on how long you mean.
it
Eventually, yes, but to me, eventually, even competence breaks down because it's how you measure it. I mean, power is very efficient in its competent efficacy, right?
well, I mean, yeah, we're going to get lost in terms here. Um,
Okay, hold that thought. He
hold that
also
thought.
says,
Pin.
put a pin in that. I am probably a social liberal. I think that what sets us apart from animals is the ability to contemplate reality. We decide what are the most real things in life. But for me, it's important to have openness to change, though I struggle with change, like new technology. Kind of what we're talking about.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's absolutely. I think I would agree with Jay on a lot of levels. Like, um, animals don't prioritize values. Now, whether or not we contemplate reality, that's a sinkhole I'm not going down tonight. Um,
No, because I mean it's important to stay within the observable realm when we talk about the polis. To Jay's point, competence has to come in at some point because
oh, absolutely. Or will be replaced
when it
by
comes to the
somebody who's
polis, we
competent.
have to progress, right?
Yeah, at some point, I don't know. The way I think of it in my mind, like yes, there are. I can think of maybe a couple of historical examples where power has overcome incompetence. However, eventually, the fear of the rod, there's something. The rod is something to be feared, but there are other things to fear too, like going hungry, um,
Yeah.
or too many people getting beat by the rod. I mean, it competence and power. And of course, I'm using power here in a rather pejorative and punishing sense, um, as
Right.
opposed to
I
like the
mean,
ability to do something.
yeah, that's the thing. To me, it does seem to me that power is not a unilateral object of pain or evil. Without power, we do not we do not produce
Sure.
good.
Yeah, you've got to. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm with you.
Superman is pretty powerful, but he's a good guy. Not
Um,
real.
yeah,
Santa Claus?
yeah, yeah. Um,
Um, but as far as I mean, it's the funny interplay between power and effecting good, or even affecting. Because competence to me is a vague term, because you can be really competent at being a tyrant. You can be really like the people that created the pyramids were extremely powerful and extremely competent at building pyramids.
yeah, I'm not sure if those are useful terms for our conversation.
Well, here's the thing though, is that competence is not a ongoing thing. Competence is very finite,
Is
right?
it though? I mean, but I mean, even like in the way you're using it, competence is relative to the object that you're trying. To the
Well,
to the
competence
effect you intend.
necessitates an observable goal.
It,
And once
or,
that goal is
or
accomplished,
or an observable outcome, right? Yeah, and
an outcome, right?
either you
Yeah.
achieve that outcome or you don't.
So it's finite. Power is not.
But competence as a construct is relative, right? Because you like how would you measure competence and incompetence except for a specific outcome, right? And so like every time you change the specific outcome, your understanding of competence thereby just shifts a little bit. But even
Couldn't you
power,
say that there's certain power in being able to shift shift the emphasis on what outcome is deemed competent?
sure. But even that in of itself is probably some form of competence. Our
Ooh,
current president is really good at that. What's going on over here? I'm in the camera. What's going on over here? Um,
true.
it, yeah, but to Jay's point, I think maybe one way to bring this back to what we're talking about is
Yeah.
how do we become competent members of our community? Like, what is it going to take for us? And like, I'm going to use a personal example. Let's get really concrete. Um, I live in a little town, little city, probably the best way to describe it, little city. That for some reason we are just really popular with homeless folks, and part of it
Who's
is I think
we?
we being the city of Bristol, Tennessee, and
Okay.
Virginia, and increasingly, despite the fact that there there's this popularity, like folks just show up here and they just stay. Um, there's also an increasing amount of acrimony, so to speak, towards folks who do not live the same way as other people live. I almost don't even want to use the word homeless, where it's like some of these folks I've met, and they choose to live differently.
Yeah.
Some are living differently out of circumstances that are probably often beyond their control.
The odd domicile lifestyle.
Yeah. And some people, yes, let's be honest, like the life that they're currently living is the direct consequences of previous choices. But one of the things that I've noticed is that while the acrimony has increased, there have been steps taken to persuade alternative life people who are living an alternative lifestyle on the street. Okay, let's just say homeless people to go be homeless someplace else. Okay. And my struggle is this, like, they're not really being homeless in some other city. They're being homeless someplace else in our city, just outside of view. Right? Like, I don't want to see that. And yes, again, going back to where we started, people that are different from us are scary. Or when we perceive someone as different, we feel fear, or we have an experience inside of our bodies we call fear. But personally,
there's a human reaction that elicits fear.
Yeah. So no, I mean, I've personally struggled over the last month of like, what can I do? Like, just Joe Schmo me, who doesn't have deep pockets, who's not well connected, who's reasonably bright but not very hardworking. And not a lot of times. Sometimes
about that.
Sometimes. I that's really an area that has I've thought about, but I haven't done anything. And I think, to Jay's point, outside of hierarchies, and we can watch. I mean, we could create one. Like, there's nothing stopping me from drawing attention to this issue. Leveraging technology, drawing attention to the issue. Coalition building, collaborating with other people. That action in of itself creates potential power, right? Or maybe even potential. We could say power, possibly, or the possibility for action. I guess, but to Jay's point, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, the question that I really have for myself is, how do I become, a competent member of my community?
Well, I think that's the real point, is that you, I, and Jay, and whoever's watching, I think as humans, we value competency over power without question, right?
Well, maybe I don't. I guess I want to put competency first, like taking the necessary steps that when power is presented, the ability to do something, it's done well. It's you know what I mean? Like, there are plenty of people that are probably competent. So I think a good example of how power works, or can work, and rightly so, like the discussion about racism in our nation. And, you've probably heard the term making room at the table.
Yeah.
The reality of making room at the table is so that way people who are different than the people already at the table have access to power. They have access to a place or a forum where things get done. Mm-hmm. And to me, in my mind, like, I'm on the camera here and it's opposite. Like, that's one part of it, right? And sometimes we find ourselves in these places of power, and sometimes we are empowered, even independently. Like Bill Gates, I think is a great example of somebody who he doesn't have to show up in a room. Like, he just strokes a check, right? Like, that's a particular kind of empowerment that it's like, whatever, But normally with community life, power is created when people come together around resources and make decisions, and things go from there. But I guess in my place, I'm still kind of a couple steps back going, well, what does it mean to be competent? And how much competence do you need or perceived competence before you start really pressing into, Scott with some wisdom.
Scott. Scott's in the house. I'm glad he's here. Because he says, and to your point, what you're talking about right now, isn't competence well realized a form of power in and of itself?
It could be.
Could be. However,
Maybe.
I think that there's the temporal problem, right? Whereas competence is something that is described, and power is something that is prescribed. Well, or at least competence is something that we go back and we can identify, and power is something that we can identify immediately. Right? It's like a lot of things that take results.
Or maybe these things are
time.
actually a little closer together. Because I'm just thinking, like, when we evaluate competence, it's really like, it's after the fact, right? Like we're looking back and we evaluate, like, that person was competent. Like, they can appear competent before something is done, but really that's just a guess on our part, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know. There's a part of me that almost wants to push competence and power really close together. As far as, I mean,
and that's what Scott's saying.
Yeah.
But the difference is that in the moment you can feel power, ow, but you have to wait to see if it was competent or not.
The whipping, yeah. Yeah,
if somebody forces me to do something, right, that's power. If what I did for them helped me and them, that's competent.
That's one way to look at it. I'm just wondering if, again, I'm going to go back to, I don't think these words are helping us, but
yeah, you're right.
I
tend to agree with that.
I think power and competence are interesting concepts, but then there's an aspect of, like, I don't know. I mean, within like, how do we become useful, loving, effective, dare I even say competent members of our community? Like, what do we need to do that? I mean, other than clearly, like, in my own mind, I think one of the things that's held me back from stepping into the arena, so to speak, on this issue locally for me has just been time. Not even financial resources, because I don't think that's absolutely necessary. Because like my wife and I were driving. Well, this came up in the conversation driving, but we actually came up when we were walking, because there were some recent signs put up in a park that basically were like homeless people. There were nicer words than this, but the blunt message was homeless people go away. And my initial thought was, where are they going to go? Like, and so my next thought is, how does one find these people now that they're no longer congregating in the park? Like the guys that would drink malt liquor at the table, and tell bawdy stories and, shake my hand and holler at me. Where are they now? Like, I know they're still around. I just don't know how to find them now. And be able to ask, like, well, what do you need? Like, I'm not judging the fact that you live differently than me. I'm just trying to figure out, like, what does a brother need to live well?
Yeah.
Or how can, I'm your neighbor. How can I love on you a little bit? That's respectful to you.
Okay. Well, I think that is key. Jay says, knowledge can make you more competent, and as a byproduct, you can be more powerful. Yes. But power does not necessarily make you more knowledgeable.
That is sadly true, yes. And power shows up, and I think in a lot of ways that I'm thinking of, like, there's influence.
And I think that is, that's when we're distinguishing between, well, and that's the interesting thing between religion and the polis, between civic engagement.
Okay.
Well, maybe not. I think I love your redirecting us back to behavior, because it does come back to behavior. What do we see happen, right? And religion cares about that just as much. But there is I know you hate the transcendent, but I come back to the transcendent principles of religion versus
not allowed.
What?
So Kantians not allowed.
Well,
Take your transcendentals
you know,
and go away.
but that's where when you're talking about knowledge, you're talking about transcendent ideas.
Are we?
When you're talking about power, you're
We
talking
could-
about physical manipulation, behavioral manipulation.
well, or things that move, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
things, you affect things with power, right? Things
Yeah.
move. I might disagree that all knowledge is idea and transcendent. I think we would live in a very cold world if that were the case.
You're right.
But
Obviously,
but
no,
that being
no,
said,
no.
there
That's a
are
good point.
Ideas
Ideas without behavior,
but
what are they?
beliefs are important.
But beliefs
ideas
without
are
behavior, what
important.
are they? Nothing.
They yes. And beliefs without experience and relationship, yes, those are nothing. But the way they actually play out in real life is even more insidious. Because they often get confused for something and anyway, I'm not going to go down that round path. But you were talking
I think
about
that
religion
is the difficulty.
in the city.
What?
You were talking about religion in the city.
Okay, well, I do think that is the insidious nature of both politics and religion.
Okay.
Is that beliefs become a thing rather than
Oh, sure.
a means.
Wow.
And we begin to focus on the beliefs rather than the results of the beliefs. Like the beliefs become our identity. And in a society
correct.
where your behavior doesn't have a one-to-one connection with your survival, the efficacy of it, the competence of it is lost.
I think what happens is it serves purposes for which we did not intend.
Say more about that.
So that, I think that's like the difficulty with ideology. Is ideology oftentimes starts off with a love for or a desire for truth, but ends up being some big stick that we beat our neighbors over the head with. Yeah. The thing that immediately came to my mind is like somebody had asked me here recently if I watch football, and I was like, no, I don't watch football. I like to read a book. And I that idea comes to my mind because, again, going back to identity, like I don't identify with a team. And the reason why I don't identify with a team is because that is meaningless to me. However, if I were playing football,
you would identify with the team you were playing with.
I would, being a spectator in that arena is not something that's appealing to me. I can enjoy a football game if I go in person. Watching on TV doesn't do anything because I don't have any attachments.
Yeah.
To those things. Give me tickets to any football game. I'll go watch it because it's fun.
That's
it's much more embodied, right?
Well, Scott has brought up a couple times how he gave up football on Sundays or gave up football period to spend time in the great books with his or doing deeper things with his family. And how can you not
How does
laud
wisdom relate to competence and power?
That's wisdom. How does wisdom relate to competence and power?
And that's where I like the word wisdom, Scott, because I almost think of, I guess there's a purer view of philosophia that, where it is the love of wisdom. But like Sophia itself is competence and power. It is an embodied ability to do what needs to get done.
But I think it comes back to this idea of time. Wisdom to me, because power is immediate. Competence can be both.
It can be. I think there's room for potential power, right? Like if I leave a revolver on the table, that's power. Now, whether or not I pull the trigger, That's a different story.
However, you only know if it's power in the moment. Like it may be powerless if the child does not know it can shoot.
Um,
But so the temporal thing to me is like, to me, wisdom is the ability, going back to that the Gandalf quote, the wisdom to say, I don't know, like whether or not he will, Gollum will affect good or evil. What his role is to play in this, I do not know. And therefore I don't take his life, That's a gross
paraphrase.
Paraphrase of it. But
That's okay.
I had a better one back. Anyway, so but I think that's wisdom, is being able to, I see, that's where I go back to transcendence, is being able to arise above immediate behavior and have faith in something that is more than what's going on, right? Whether it be competence or power, we have faith in something that is beyond both of those things. And wisdom is the ability to rise above both those things, right? And say life is longer, time goes on, and I can project further than my feelings right now.
I certainly, I'm just trying to conceptualize what you're talking about. Tell me more, Judah.
Can wisdom, I guess my question, this recently, this is something I wanted to run by you. Oh man, we're right at the hour mark, and this is where I remember, but
you should write these things down.
I thought about this in the shower the other day. What if there's an aspect of life that we ascribe pain? What if there is no such thing as pain and only failure? What we call pain is just failure. What if our feelings have zero to do with our feelings have zero to do with bad or good, and really accomplishing or not accomplishing desired, so going back to competence, accomplishing or not accomplishing desired effects is really all that it comes down to.
So pragmatism is all that matters, or utilitarianism?
No, not necessarily, because see, wisdom,
I'm just curious.
Well, but see, wisdom, when you spread it out over time,
yeah,
sure, in the moment pragmatism rules, but wisdom gives us the ability to project out and transcend the moment and say, I can accomplish a better
but
good.
We don't ever transcend the moment, though. I mean, like, wisdom ultimately guides the decision in the now, right? Like, I guess that's where I get lost. Like, I hear you talk about transcendence and delayed gratification and things that almost to me sound like hope, or could be hope, but
faith.
Well, faith, trust, but to me, I mean, what's wise ultimately is embodied. It manifests itself in the here and the now, and that may manifest itself in inaction, right? Like, there's a lot of wisdom in doing nothing, and sometimes it is unwise to do nothing. But it is, I mean, I guess from a Christian perspective, it is, bathed in an atmosphere of hope and trust and faith, that things, that we're not the only one making decisions. We're not the only ones with power in the moment by a long shot. Like, how much power we have as humans individually is rather limited.
Yeah.
Um, but on the
Sorry, just a
point
minute.
of feelings, though, I,
Yeah.
I, I guess my struggle is my starting point is humans have feelings. Now what?
Interesting.
What's the point of the feelings, right? As opposed to
Yeah.
how do I
Yeah.
negate this? How do I negate this experience? Because it just seems to get in the way.
Well, I have an idea about that, and
Stop.
Scott has a really good point here. I understand that the topic is Polis, but I can't help but thinking of how Christ exhibited perfect power and yet didn't wield power at all within the world's concept of power.
Sure,
That's interesting.
absolutely.
Well, it depends on how you define power.
Well, no, I mean, and that's why I was talking about, the notion of potential power. Because there are some occasions where Jesus, like I think the conversation between Christ and Pilate, it's kind of like, I could just end this all right now, but I don't.
But even
yeah.
in a more in like a transcendent, not transcendent, in a transient form, he was incredibly popular. Isn't popularity a form of power?
Oh, well, yeah, I think Scott's point is like he didn't use power the way most of us think of the term power. Like I was using it, or I was thinking of it very much earlier in a very punitive, punishing, like what certain people in power. I mean, you can exert power in a rather drastic and violent way, and yeah, that like, but I think that's the whole thing that oftentimes gets misunderstood about the Gospels is that despite the fact that Jesus keeps saying it over and over and over again, like, my kingdom is not of this world. How many times do I have to tell you? Jesus, how about James and John? Like, when you come into we'll sit beside you and rule. And he's like, it's not like that, man. It's not. It's really not like that. Like, you all are going to go out.
Well, here's the thing.
One of you's going on a cross. The other one's going to get beheaded.
Yeah.
John, you're going to live till you're really old and be the only one that didn't die a violent death.
Yeah. Well, to Jay and Scott's point, if we could put them together, I mean, the whole idea of power and competence is like, and wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to really see what we're supposed to accomplish, right? Like, wisdom is the ability to really tap into, in Jesus's case, he could have done all those things. It's like, that's not what it's about, man. I don't care about that stuff.
Yeah, I think there are other aspects of things like that we could certainly include in a longer conversation. Like discernment would be one that comes to mind very quickly. To me, it's very clear what Jesus' ultimate. I mean, Jesus came to do the will of the Father, and the will of the Father was not to overthrow human order in a human way. He completely upsets the whole of created order by the incarnation. So yeah, I mean, like the power structure is entirely different than we experience it.
And see, that gets back to, and I want to come back to this idea. I want to really understand this idea of whether or not pain, as a man understands it, because I can't really understand, from a woman's perspective, but
Sure.
For me, from a man's perspective, I really wonder whether or not pain exists outside of failure. Like, maybe every time we lament physical pain, we're really lamenting the inability to block it,
Are we? Or is it just simply the receptors inside of our body?
Well, it can't just be the receptors, right?
It can't?
Because some people like that, and it's not painful to them. It's not uncomfortable to them.
Yeah, but that's generally a shift in the context of which. Yeah, pain's complicated.
No, but I mean, even in the sense of like work, right? Like
Okay.
doing work, we gladly
Or
trade
working out,
pain.
right?
We trade pain for results. We
Hmm.
gladly do it.
Hmm.
And if pain was evil, we
Yeah,
wouldn't trade it for
I, I
the
don't think that's the
result.
thing. I don't think pain is in and of itself
I think it's
a
just like
moral
money.
thing.
It is just a real good indicator of failure.
But so is it a how would pain then be an indicator of failure if you're trading it in work or in exercise or in athletics or now it's certainly a failure in the sense of an ideal, right? Like it's the reality of finitude. It's the reality that we break down. It's the reality that we're not
Mm.
machines. That we truly, I mean, there's a biological animalistic part of being a human that's not a straight line, turn on, turn off. Like it goes in cycles, it goes in waves. You've got to rest and refuel. um, but I guess again, going back to being the question of whether or not it's moral, I don't think that's really a moral question unless I
Well, I don't.
impose some other standard on it. Um,
Well,
just throwing
I
that out
guess
there.
what I'm saying is when we trade it for something good,
Yeah.
it is no longer painful. Well, I would
Is it?
say,
I mean, it's still painful. That's why I don't like
yeah, I
working out.
guess you're right. Huh?
I mean, I'd like to be, ripped and
Yeah.
buff, but the pain, the time investment in the pain
But see, what I would
just
say is you're
doesn't.
not experiencing pain of body. You're experiencing emotional pain of failure.
But I'm not
So when
not when I'm lifting
so
weights. No, that hurts.
no. But what I'm saying is
Or if I go
if we
running, it
reframe it,
really hurts.
if we reframe it to say that pain is really just a currency to illuminate
Yeah.
failure or
Tell that to
success.
my body. Yeah, my body doesn't work on
I
or
mean, it
does it?
does.
Or does it?
You lament it, therefore you feel the
But I don't feel
failure
the
of
pain.
it.
I don't feel failure. I feel fine right now. So I can
Yeah,
rationalize
yeah,
away
you're
the
right. Oh,
trade off.
all
Like,
right. So the physical feeling, yeah,
because in my mind, the reality, to move forward, I actually have to embrace pain, um, as the path to progress in that particular, you know, area. And that's the thing. I think, when we, and I'm just gonna throw this out here, when we try to move away from reframe, resist, um, or even compartmentalize, or what's the
mm.
word,
Belittle in some ways, or
yeah, I mean, when we don't embrace, again, this is going back to being embodied. When we don't, like, because these are feelings, like pain is a
yeah,
feeling. When we don't embrace them, then I don't know. I tend to think it just takes us in places we ultimately didn't want to go to begin with. Um,
hmm.
and that actually embracing these experiences is the way forward. Um, because there's some amount of pain that's non-negotiable in living. Um,
Yeah,
Whether we characterize it as failure or success or loss or love, it's non-negotiable. And then we can certainly add more pain from there. But pain is never alone. Something else always comes with it.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I guess that's what I was sort of realizing is that there is no such thing as just it's just pain. Pain without failure is tolerable.
um, Maybe. I'm not sure if people with chronic back pain would agree with that statement. But and it would also go to, like, what do you mean by failure?
Yeah,
And
I
I'm
think that's
curious why those are linked. Like pain
a good
equals
question.
failure. Pain is
Well,
associated with failure.
because
And
I
I don't
think
want them to be
failure.
associated, so I've got to pull them apart.
Well, because as a counselor, I feel like failure is something that we ascribe to pain that that makes it pejorative when it doesn't necessarily need to be. So somebody with chronic back pain doesn't need to feel like a failure.
No.
Even though they have pain, the pain doesn't necessarily need to be, it will be an inhibitor if they accept it as a negative thing, right? As some, and really ultimately to me, as I was thinking about it, I was thinking things are only negative if we accept them as failure, right? Like if they play into an idea of success, they're not negative.
They may not be negative. They still are painful.
Yeah. Well, in that way, negative.
And the reframe is helpful. Like, and that's why I like to talk with people about, like, there is a non-negotiable aspect of living that's painful, right? And let's see if I can angle this towards a little camera on my phone. That's non-negotiable, suffering. But yeah, when we evaluate something in a negative light, or we ascribe to it, we judge it as failure, we often feel more pain, more suffering, which voluntarily expands the circle of suffering beyond what was non-negotiable now to something that's voluntary.
See, yeah, it's that negotiation thing. It's that negotiation that you're talking about right in there, because you see people negotiate with the pain of cold, right? I've seen like this guy I know who lives and he negotiates with the pain of loneliness and cold he is in Zero Town, Quebec, Canada, just lives there alone and survives, right? And I thought, this was incorporated into my thinking of like pain. And I thought, but how does he frame not just survival but success? And
or does he?
Or does he? Or I think he does.
I mean, does he?
He does. He does. He's just,
he puts it on a binary.
He's a very optimistic and happy person. So the idea of success has been negotiated. Now, the pain of cold, the pain of loneliness has not been framed in terms of in negative terms, right? In fact, he has negotiated the opposite way. He likes cold and he likes the loneliness.
But that's moving towards it, right?
Yeah.
You know, but it's not. I mean, ultimately, I don't think it's a mental trick.
Is it a negotiation? It doesn't have to be a trick.
I'm sure there was some negotiating before he pulled the trigger on, I'm going to embrace the cold. I'm going to embrace loneliness and flip it, you know.
I mean, somebody who survives, somebody who is happy in spite of unnegotiable physical ailments, right? Has to come to terms with the pain of this ailment is not real. If it is real,
I think that's my struggle, is the pain of the ailment is real. There is some, if there is some ailment causing pain, there is some amount of pain that is non-negotiable. That no amount of reframing, no amount of negotiating will negate the pain. Now, on a scale from 1 to 10, right? Like, there are things that we can do to take pain, even mentally, from 7 down to 3, right? But the pain doesn't go away. Like it rarely ever goes from 7 to 0, if that makes sense. And so as I'm listening, there's that aspect where I'm like, I'm with you about, like, let's go from 7 to 2.5.
And I hear you. You know? Yeah. There is a
2.5.
There is an aspect of it that is just a physical aspect that's non-negotiable.
It's non-negotiable. Yeah, like, people can't live at 7, 8, and 9. they'll medicate themselves or do other things.
But I wonder if they can. I just wonder if they can. I wonder if that is untrue. You know, as we see monks do unimaginable physical things, you
Sure.
know? Like maybe the only reason it's
They're-
unnegotiable is because we have limitations to our socio.
there's always limitation. I think this is my thing. Like, can people through various practices and training really stretch the boundaries of their limitations?
Yeah.
Yes, but as human beings, as creatures who are we are not uncreated. Like, there is always going to be boundaries and limitations in this life, and one of those things that comes with boundaries and limitations is pain.
Pain. Well, Jay says, I agree with you. And Jay says, you may have to describe the definition of pain.
There are different kinds of
Because definitions freaking matter. I put in the freaking. There may be different kinds of pain. Yes, I agree. It also has to do with reality. What is the most real thing or pain? And he also says, pain is not just a feeling, but an experience. And I think that's what I'm getting to. Is the aspect of not controlling necessarily, but being able to fit, because our physical experiences are just that, an experience, and being able to fit those experiences, you know, through wisdom, time, and power into a spectrum of reality. And I'm just afraid, I guess this has to do more with me. I'm afraid that in my life, I have too much. And you're right, that it is a spectrum. I guess I lean too, I realize that I lean, the spectrum to me is a little too sensitive on the end of failure. So that even a physical pain is interpreted as a failure. And if pain was subjugated to just a chemical biological response rather than you know, like a metaphysical failure, I would be able to be more successful, I think.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Or you would feel more successful?
Good question. So, yeah, I guess that's the other question. Is success just as metaphysical and unmoored by physical
from the body?
realities?
Yeah, no.
No, I would say, that's my argument, is that success is, I guess that's my argument, is that success is less moored by physical realities than pain. Pain is completely, the sensation of pain, the experience of pain can be framed. Success,
sort of,
not so much.
There's a part of me that wants to just like drive over there and beat you with a baseball bat and see if you can reframe that in some way. Because I mean, as I'm thinking through, I mean, like, because when you're the victim of something painful, I mean, truly the victim of something, right?
Yeah.
Like, is that really a failure? Like, can I really equate that with failure? I suppose I could. Like, I failed to protect myself, maybe, or I was struck by lightning.
Not just your failure, but the failure of others.
Or just, I don't know, the failure, the system failed me. I don't know. We'll have to pick that one apart sometime. Like,
I don't know. It's just an interesting question. It's something that popped into my head. Is that
while you're in the shower?
During one of my shower cries. No, Jude has too much pain. I would say, I am in the interesting stage of my life where I feel like I have not had enough pain.
I was about
Where
to
I
say,
have,
like, most of my conversations with Judah involve, like, how do I get more pain?
yeah,
This obviously can't be the right thing because it doesn't involve enough pain. Like, that's how I know it's
which
good. It's
isn't that
good when there's
ironic?
more pain. If I just had more pain, it would be a success.
So I guess that does sort of play into, like, I feel like I have Pollyanna too much of life
Mm-hmm.
to where I haven't put things in the categories of failure or success.
Mm-hmm.
I've just been able to slough off the physical pain
Yeah.
and continue and not thought about the ramifications of the theoretical success.
If I had embraced this pain 10
Yeah.
years ago, where would I be now?
Yeah. If I had said, "Hey, what am I failing somewhere? You know, should I be more
That
successful?"
sounds like a whole lot of navel gazing, Judah. I'm going to give you free advice and tell you to not do that.
or
Sato, well, I
sadomasochism.
mean, I wasn't going to say it, Jay. I mean, I wasn't going to bring it up, but some people like that. They like the pain.
No, no. Most people will. My wife will tell you how much of a pansy I am.
How pain-free you like it.
Yes, I
No
am.
pain.
I am not a lover of pain. However, I do think, and it comes, let's bring it back to this idea of polis and get away from my navel gazing. I guess that's why I was it did make me think, because a lot of things are ascribed to those that stand up against power. People say speak truth to power,
Sure.
but in history, speaking truth to power has accomplished zero. Acting truth to power has accomplished much more.
I mean, sometimes no. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, sometimes you got to speak truth to power. I think the one that, and there's obviously action in speaking. William Wilberforce comes to mind, as somebody that I think I can't remember how many years it took him to outlaw the slave trade in the British Empire.
Yeah.
It was a lot. I think it was some big number, 30, 40.
Yeah.
And that's speaking truth to power. Now, of course, my
And
favorite
speaking
example
is
of
an
truth to
action,
power.
right?
Sure.
Speaking
Well,
is an action.
It is, St. John, John the Baptist, I think to me is the archetype of speaking truth to power. And it generally is a great example of what happens when you speak truth to power. You become a martyr. I mean, that's on the table too.
Yeah.
And it's always
Yeah.
through, some twisted, circumstance.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Okay, but in
It's
American
good to speak truth to
history,
power.
other than I mean, even in that case,
Yeah.
What created change? Speaking truth helps, but what really helps is action.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. 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 Embodiment, right? Like taking words and then moving them through my body and into my hands and into my feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. The mouth
And
is important, but the mouth is a
okay,
tricky organ.
so to bring it around back to the polis, what I'm
Back to the
afraid
polis.
of is that as Americans, we are so detached from the pain of any decisions when it comes to polis, whether it be in our neighborhood, our state, or our country,
Yeah.
that we're basically a bunch of voyeuristic we're just voyeuristic in our approach to our engagement with voyeuristic and naysayers. No matter what, we're naysaying on one
Yeah.
side or the other instead of taking action ourselves. And so
Sure.
there is something admirable. I'll say this. I think there is something admirable about those that went to the Capitol. And especially those who didn't kill anyone.
Who didn't partake in hooliganism?
It depends on how you define hooliganism.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, just going into a place and sitting on a chair, I think there is something admirable about the initiative there.
It definitely we can agree it shows some initiative. Sadly, and of course, this is obviously like I wasn't there, and
Yeah.
in the bits and pieces of media that have found their way to me, I'm sure that those were expertly cultivated to only show the most hooligan of displays. No, but I agree.
Well,
but I think that's part of the difficulty of the way that we've structured our lives culturally. Like very few people actually go to city council meetings. I know I don't. But I also we don't live. We don't live in a world where everything shuts down. Like when we talk about Polis, you know, depending upon the size of the city, like and how things are run, yeah, we don't have very many forums or venues where people get involved on that level, or maybe we do, and we've been trained, dare I say, educated, trained in such a way as to not move in those circles.
yeah.
Like it's never. I've thought about going to a city council meeting, but I've never gone.
Maybe we've even been trained to speak a certain way so that we don't put forth strong opinions.
Well, that's
in a public forum.
Sure. Well, you wouldn't know anything about that.
Oh, wait. Scott says, this isn't, I like this. He says, Wilberforce is a great example of what I've been getting at.
Yeah.
And it brings it back to Polis. You have wisdom, competence, tenacity, and persistence.
Yep.
Resulting in power.
I think Wilberforce is a great
depends on how you
love your neighbor. And that's the thing. Like, that's the hard part. I think everyone's got to find their place where they have to personally embody loving their neighbor. William Wilberforce, he knew he got in his lane, and he stayed in his lane till he got it done. And I say that not knowing a whole lot more about William Wilberforce's life. I'm sure that he had other. It wasn't the only thing he thought about and did. Right? Like. Right. He was more than one thing. He was more than being an abolitionist. And he had a very specific calling and gifting.
I'm just afraid that as a fat American, I've gotten too concerned with my comfort. I've become too concerned with not feeling pain that I have completely avoided being as successful as William Wilberforce. You know what I mean? Like, not that I could have been as successful as him, but maybe I could have if, like, maybe in trying to avoid the failure the felt failure of pain, I have accepted the theoretical failure of the theoretical pain of real failure, you know?
That you've accepted the theoretical pain of real failure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I go back to navel gazing. Quit that.
What's that?
That's why I go back to the navel gazing and looking over your shoulder. Like, now, I think there's some truth that yes, we fat Americans are addicted to comfort. And the first thing that came to my mind when you were talking about that was Yeah, I'm too focused on my own comfort, and really, I'm not really loving my neighbor. There's a lack of altruism I can confess on my own part of,
Hmm.
seeking my neighbor's well-being. Like not even necessarily
Yeah.
my neighbor's comfort, though comfort is sometimes part of well-being. But seeking my neighbor's health, seeking their well-being, seeking what's good, truly good, um, for my neighbor, within communal life. And
Hmm.
that manifests itself in all kinds of ways, whether it's my homeless neighbor or my neighbors that live over here on Kentucky Avenue that,
Yeah.
they've got cars that fly down that street 40 miles an hour like a bunch of crazy people. But we've all talked about like, well, how can we change this? And, but I don't think any
Yeah.
of us have really taken steps to like go get in front of the city council and go like, look, hey
I,
guys, there's a problem on Kentucky Avenue. What are y'all going to do to
I
fix it?
think navel gazing is the exact problem I'm talking about. Is that we're so concerned with not feeling physical pain.
Yeah. So
Well, we're defining pain so much
go
about
get you some
comfort.
pain tomorrow, and and
All
pursue
right.
some
Well, so
success.
so let's get outside of the idea of pain. I
Yeah.
realize
Well,
I
no, I
have.
mean, go get you some pain tomorrow. Like, I'm gonna go get that pain, and then I'm gonna go give me some success, whatever that is,
Well,
tomorrow.
no, I think it's the reverse. It's like I think ignoring the idea of pain and really focusing on what is real success, like Christ, like Scott talked about, like his idea of success was so much more than failure to organize, failure to defeat, failure to avoid physical pain. You know, his his idea of success was completely different and above all of basically I'll just say what I look for in everyday living.
Obviously, on a giant cosmic magnitude level higher than where we're playing. He's playing on an entirely cosmic playing field differently than we are. Sure. Um, because he still lays
Well,
down his life, like right, like what does he say to his disciples? Greater love has no man than the one that lays down his life for his friend. What does he go and
yeah.
do? He lays down his life for his friend. However, he also has the power to take it up again. Um, cosmic, like playing on a slightly cosmic,
Yeah, that
on a
is
different player
true.
field. But
I mean, on
laying
a
down one's life,
philosophical level,
laying down one's life for one's
that's a
neighbor.
good
Now,
question.
that's
Yeah.
one where we can meet, with the Lord, right?
Mm.
Like that's a place where there's communion with the Lord.
Mm.
Um, one of my favorite, I think it's chapter 5. From the Epistle to Hebrews, that Christ learned obedience through the things that he suffered. Um,
Mm.
that experience for him was part and parcel of, fulfilling the Father's plan. So I mean, and
Yeah.
that's why I keep pushing this notion of embracing pain. That there
Yeah.
there is some amount that's non-negotiable, and the only way
Mm.
that we face that well in life is by embracing it. And that's that I think even goes a little step beyond accepting it. Like, yeah, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I agree, there's pain, as opposed to I'm going to give the pain a hug. And I think that's like one of the things that, and again, it is going to go back to like what you were talking about earlier, that are things that are transcendent as far as hope and faith and trust. Like when I think of the lives of the martyrs, that's what sets martyrs apart. They embrace pain, but they embrace pain because they have hope. They embrace pain because they have
Mm-hmm.
faith. They embrace pain because they have trust, because they have
Mm-hmm.
love, they have fidelity, they have desire for the Lord. Um, they don't shrink back from it.
Mm-hmm.
They're not, and they're not sadomasochists either. Um, because there's something on the other side of that pain, right? Like they're
Mm-hmm.
that's not the end of the story. And just
Right.
like pursuing success, I mean, yeah, there's going to be pain, but that's not the end of the story. And yeah, maybe, and I could say, you and I both probably in the past, have you know, we're like, I don't. I mean, yeah, it'd be kind of cool to have some success, but there's that pain. Like,
Mm,
I don't know if I want to embrace that.
mm.
But we're getting older, and maybe it's time to embrace a little pain. Um,
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny that we're way over time, but it is funny going back to things we've already talked about, so we don't have
yeah,
to talk about them again. But as we get older, if it's as we can probably absorb the pain not as easily as when we were younger, we realize the benefit and probably embrace it more.
or dare I even say the wisdom in the pain, right? Like
I think that's where it goes back to the
that's where getting
wisdom.
older helps.
Yeah.
I
Well,
hope.
brother, I appreciate your the discussion. Thank you, Scott and
Thank
Jay,
you,
for
Scott and Jay.
your. I really appreciate your input here, and let's go forward. Let's keep thinking about this, and as we engage in the polis, let's think about how to be wise about it. See you again next week if Josh's creek don't rise.
And the Lord will.